happens when leaders and entire organizations begin operating from sovereignty, not as a concept, but as a lived state. In this final episode of our sovereignty series, we explore what it looks like when presence becomes culture and leadership becomes a force for elevation. Here's a taste of what emerged from our conversation.
Sovereign leader entertains all different perspectives, honors those perspectives, thus honoring those people. And then that gives birth to an environment where people feel valued, they feel heard, they feel understood. And that brings forth what we call the magic of that additional discretionary energy. Well, this person really values what I have to say and share. And so let me come forward and take off those limiters, that self-censorship that we all do in different environments to say, hey, let me really get deep and share why I feel the way I feel and what's the reasoning behind this. And that speaks to that psychological safety that I know that we're going to touch on a little bit later on.
Sovereignty is not a technique. As we've talked about today, it's the ground from which leadership stands or falls. And this groundedness is already in you, ready to be fully activated. Now, if your nervous system is tired of leading from the edge, being performative, if you're done chasing fulfillment through hacks and habits, and if you know there's more available to you than you've been told, maybe this series did stir something in you for a good reason. If you've wondered what leadership could look like without burnout, control, or self-doubt, this episode is for you. Join us for this closing conversation in the Sovereignty series and see what's possible when leadership starts from the inside out. Let's dive in. I want to welcome you back to Unfazed Under Fire. Today, we're completing our three-part series on sovereignty. In part one, we laid the groundwork for what sovereignty truly is. It's not a philosophical idea, but a lived experience that unlocks a deeper level of leadership. In part two, Ryan, who's joining me today, shared his firsthand experience going through the reset, and it was real, raw, and it was very inspiring to have that conversation. So thanks again, Ryan, for that. And now in part three, we're asking what happens when leaders and organizations start operating from this place of sovereignty, day in and day out. What shifts? What becomes possible? What stops happening as well that we don't want? We want to focus not only on individual leaders, but with their teams and the systems that they shape. So let's bring us home. Again, we had a technical issue with Anatoly who couldn't join us today. So Ryan agreed to come and show up and be my co-host today as we talk about this. So let's just jump right in. And we want to start by reconnecting to what we mean by sovereignty. What does it look like day to day when a leader's grounded in this place? How do they engage their day, their team, and the challenges that emerge? So what does sovereignty look like when it's for leadership, when it's in motion? We've talked about the qualities that emerge. The leaders have more energy. Their decision-making becomes faster, cleaner, and conversations and meetings shift. So instead of, I want to look good for the boss is basically now in that place of sovereignty is bringing something out, a different quality in those conversations and meetings, which matters because everything happens through conversations and organizations, right? Nothing gets done if you don't talk. A lot of that changes because when a leader is more present, they don't demand it through a demand, but they demand it through their very presence. Let's waste any time here. Let's get to the heart of the matter. What do you think about that? Even in that opinion might be wrong. What's your concern about that particular direction that we're going in that you seem to be concerned about? Things like that. So there's a whole different quality of experience that shows up. We've all been around present leaders before, right? At first, you're kind of taken back, and then after a while, you realize they're just being themselves, and then you start relaxing and being yourself, and you realize that they don't want BS, they want the real deal, even if you disagree.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going with it in my mind, is just what you had kind of pointed to, is that presence. There's no exhibition of what do I need to say to create this specific result. I don't think that there's that kind of agenda playing in the background in terms of how that executive, that leader shows up. They're genuinely curious as to how others are thinking and feeling, and they set a stage with trust and relationship for those kind of authentic conversations to take place without judgment. And that all happens through relationship, as we have talked about before. And a sovereign leader holds space for those things to exist. A very self-conscious leader does not entertain that kind of dialogue whatsoever because they are so weak in themselves and recognize that weakness and therefore try to hide it as often as possible. So they point towards a certain direction that they're always trying to achieve. They limit conversation and dialogue for fear that it may be contradictory from their particular perspective. Whereas a sovereign leader entertains all different perspectives, honors those perspectives, thus honoring those people. And then that gives birth to an environment where people feel valued, they feel heard, they feel understood. And that brings forth what we call the magic of that additional discretionary energy. Well, this person really values what I have to say and share. And so let me come forward and take off those limiters, that self-censorship that we all do in different environments to say, hey, let me really get deep and share why I feel the way I feel and what's the reasoning behind this. And that speaks to that psychological safety that I know that we're going to touch on a little bit later on. But a sovereign leader creates those environments for that psychological safety, for true, authentic dialogue to come forward and take place. And it stands to reason, and we've had these discussions before, that the more perspectives you go get on a particular topic, the more valuable that information is for a clear depiction of what the issues are that we're facing and how to potentially address those issues in a very conscious and not just short-term, but long-term perspective. And that's important to recognize too, because that's a constant stressor or tension that we deal with in the modern workforce is, yeah, we've got to get it done, so to speak, but we don't have to get it done at the cost of the long-term benefit. And so we have to balance that in our decision making as well.
Overall, what you're pointing to is this whole thing that we talk about it, performance versus presence. And a lot of leaders that step into senior roles tend to have deep expertise, deep mastery of their subject matter, whether it's finance, operations, sales, whatever. And they don't necessarily always have the ability when, let's say, they onboard into an organization to traverse a culture that's now asking them to add something onto the way they interact with others. And then you start layering that on with, you need to live by our values, which of course you should. But what does that mean? And how do I translate that? And that tends to start bringing into that performance versus presence piece, right? And you spoke to that very eloquently. So you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add to that. I'm working on with Ken Chapman Associates, and a particular training that we're working on has story depictions where it is a comparison between competence and connection. And that's what we're really speaking to as well, is some people believe that competency is enough. Hey, I've got expertise in this. I've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. I've got enough understanding of how to do this. But in so doing, we often forget or negate the importance of connection and how important that is as a leader to connect with your audience, connect with your employees, connect with your colleagues, connect with your stakeholders, because it's ultimately that connection that brings forward the environment that we're talking about where they can show up authentically and not fear judgment for their thoughts and their perspective. And that brings forward the best of them. And that often benefits the entire whole to collectively transcend their own egos, to be able to solve problems that they never thought that they could even solve through the collective consciousness and sharing of these different perspectives. Absent that, someone who is relying only on competence believes that they have all the answers, and I don't necessarily want to hear your perspective because I know how to solve this. Just listen to me, do what I tell you, and we'll go from there. And historically, that has not worked out very well for organizations. It's the organizations that recognize and respect and honor the connection with those folks that we described, the stakeholders, the employees, the colleagues, et cetera, that really win out not only in the short term, but the long term.
Yeah. And it's a lot of senior executives have to swim with the sharks, if you will, really divergent, whether they're venture capitalists that have a particular agenda. They obviously want to see their return and they're driving things in a certain way in the organization. Uh, and and you talked about competence. It's like, so there's a tendency to react to that and try to show up in a performative way to deal with those individuals. The flip side of this is what you're talking about is competence, and competence can be used as a crutch for confidence, right? In those situations. And if I show up smart as you, or I have a pushback on something you said from an expertise standpoint, somehow I could stand in that. But when you start getting into those kinds of conversations and somebody's giving you money to make things happen in your business, you may not win that argument. It becomes almost like a debate, not at a level of we're arguing, but a level of we're trading expertise here. What we're sticking into is this area of connection, as you say, competency versus connection. But then there is also executive presence that has to be in place to support that connection, to support the ability to guide people through a connecting conversation about what matters, what we care about, where we're taking things, so that I can make sure I have everything I need to make this final decision on where we're going to go and how we're going to take things forward. And that starts with being able to be present, stepping into a conversation. And a lot of times, connection and executive presence go together. They're married at the hip, if you will. And so if I'm going to go in and make, as I said, a connecting conversation, I have to bring something to the party that isn't just my competency. So what is it that they bring to the party to be able to make that connection?
You're exactly right. And two more terms as a comparative come to mind when you're talking. And this occurred to me last night on the way home from an event that I attended, is this idea of transaction versus transformation. And I've encountered this time and time again, dealing with clients. They say, hey, we want this done, we want that done. And my thoughts are, well, we can do those things that you're describing, but ultimately, what's the bigger picture of what you want accomplished? So they're focused on, as you had mentioned, the doing, getting these things done, but not necessarily the vision of where they want to go as a result of getting those things done. And that's where that transformation comes in. Transaction is that short term, can we just check that box? Yes, we can do those things. As a service provider, I can say, yeah, we can do those things, and that will achieve your end goal in a short-term basis. But let's talk a little bit about transformation, that bigger picture, that evolving of what status you find yourself in now to a future status. What does that future status look like? And that's where the clients and leaders get 10x their return, is when they focus on transformation, evolution of that status from what exists now to the future status. And so I try to pivot my clients to talk about, let's not just check boxes, but let's talk about what that future looks like and how we can transform individuals as well as entire organizations to achieve this end goal. So we don't have to continuously battle these egos, these constant dramas and things of that nature. If we are transforming people, those things just don't rise and come to fruition as often as we encounter them on a daily basis when we are only transactional with people. And when we are only transactional with people, I find it to be very commonplace where it's very ego-based. I need to get what I need to get. You need to get what you need to get. When we operate from a transformational standpoint, it comes from a deeper relationship. And there is trust that exists. There is connection that exists. And a sovereign leader knows how to drive transformation through and with people.
That's what I'm hoping you'll get back to, because we have this transactional versus transformational, connection versus competence. Have executive presence. So if you speak back to your own experiences you're having now post-reset, for example, from the resilient leader method, how does the platform of sovereignty serve all those things? Because again, otherwise they become, when they say in that training, I got to be more connecting versus competent. I've got to be more transformational versus transactional. Those are all things that are important. Like we're going to talk about psychological safety. Having executive presence, as I mentioned, is one of those things. So we have all these words that float around that are absolutely important, being versus doing. All of those words float around. How does one bring all that together and actually apply those things naturally, rather than have to go back to a checklist from a training or their coach and remember all that stuff in the midst of, my boss said I have to move this forward today with my team. I got to make sure everybody shares, but I also have to have the eye out for the BS meter because we have to move this forward. And all the things you talked about and we've talked about it are important. So what is the basis of all that? It goes back to sovereignty. But when you're standing in that, what's different from standing in your competence? What stops happening around you when you're in your sovereignty that's happening now that's getting in the way? How does sovereignty cut through the noise? To me, it's a platform from what you're standing on that helps you see those things naturally versus having to learn about them, right?
I would agree with you. It goes back to principles and values. And I talked about it in prior episodes where anytime I led any project-based initiatives with teams and groups, we would establish right up front what I called rules of the road. And that was when do we, not only the logistical components of when do we meet and how often do we meet and things of that nature, but we talked about how do we interact? When we disagree, how do you want to resolve those conflicts? What kind of notion of what do you want to get out of this experience? Not just achieving the particular project or goal, but how do you want to grow? How do you want to develop? What kind of relationship do you want to have with your colleagues when we are interacting with one another? And that gets into the values and the principles of what we're trying to achieve. By revisiting those things on a regular and recurring basis for those people that are involved, the stakeholders, is important to establish what you're describing in terms of that platform of sovereignty. Not only are you exhibiting that by entertaining that conversation as the leader of those people, but you're embedding that within them as an example, as a model that they can start to depict that for themselves, as well as the groups that they go on to lead.
I'm wondering if some of these things don't naturally come. I mean, sovereignty isn't something you learn. It's something that shifts in you that you reclaim, right? We go back to conversations we've had before, what it was like to be a kid, right? Up to 8, 9 years old. There was this sense that you own your world in a certain way. Now, of course, yeah, you listen to your parents, but you kind of, the world was your oyster and you were playing and you were exploring, and there's this place of coming forth in you that was natural. You weren't thinking through what you were going to do next. Now, obviously, not talking about bringing that childlike state back in. We're talking about bringing the qualities of that state into your experience and your expertise and your seasoning, and being more natural in your approach to things, which is naturally embedded in you. When that happens and you're playing a game, as you say, we have to know the rules of the road. How are we going to win this game? That's part of setting the stage for the conversations we need to have to move things forward. And yes, somebody that's standing in that place, because they're a leader, they need to articulate those rules of the road so that people understand what we're doing here. And yet, if those rules of the road are laid out and the leader's coming from this clear place and they know what they're attending to, this is the result I want from this meeting. This is the outcome we need to engage for our stakeholders in order for us to give them the deliverables that they're expecting or whatever. I'm then going to be focused in a certain way in that meeting naturally to want to hear input, to want to be more about connection, to be present, which is, again, it goes back to the intertwining of sovereignty and being present, that there's solidity. And yet you're also, as I say, an executive presence is being in the moment, attending to what's in front of you with those that are going to solve the problem. That's it. There's nothing any more complicated than executive presence than that. And sovereignty is the basis of that. It's the foundation of everything that we do. So when that happens, it doesn't mean that you're not going to value reading a book or going to a training or being coached. In fact, those things can magnify when you're in your sovereignty, when you're standing in that place of center, because now you're saying, what do I need to be more effective? In sovereignty, you're more interested in that. You're not necessarily reading from the menu of HR. You're saying to yourself, how can I be more effective in getting my point across in the meeting? Reflection becomes more important, not because it's something I was told to do, journal every day. It's because I need to step back, as you say, to the vision of what I'm trying to create in this meeting, because there's different levels of vision, right? All the way down to intention for this moment. And think about that and then let that go and be present to what's happening. That is the ground of everything, comes from that place of clarity and sovereignty that we tap into.
Yep. And in a professional environment, we shy away from conversations related to energy. And I think that those are important conversations to lean into because we all experience energy. Some of us may be unconscious to it. Some of us may deny it. Some of us may feel it's a little too woo-woo to even talk about. But the reality is present for all of us. And it's important to have the conversation of
we don't have energy, we can't do anything, right?
Exactly. But how often have you heard leaders and executives talk about what's the energy in the room? How would we like the energy to be in the room? And what can we personally do to exhibit the kind of energy that we want to see in that room? And I think that's an opportunity for executive leaders to really step into. Once again, 10x their impact as a result of understanding that that energy is a part of our executive presence as well, and how we show up and how we relate and how we interact with one another. I was watching a golf video the other day, and it was talking, this guy was complaining about, I didn't make a good shot and I'm an awful golfer and blah, 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 blah. And this guy walked up to him and put his finger over his mouth and said, shh. And of course, you would never do that in a professional environment, but he was doing it in a kind of joking and sarcastic way and saying, look at what energy you're creating. And it's incumbent upon us to say, look at the energy that you're creating. Is that the energy that you want in this environment? Is that the energy that you want for yourself? Is that the energy you want your colleagues to experience? And I think the executive that has those kind of conversations now has the kind of impact on people that they're like, oh my gosh, finally someone has talked about energy. Someone has really spoken to the essence of what we all experience on a regular basis. And yes, we would like to have more positive, more flowing, more uplifting and constructive energy in our work environment instead of always focusing on the problem. Because let's face it, that's what we're doing all day long. We're solving problems. Okay. And we have to use good judgment to do that. But in order to have that good judgment present, then we need to talk about what kind of energy we bring to those environments where we make those critical and strategic decisions.
Well, it's not crazy stuff. We talk about emotional intelligence all the time. What are our emotions? Energy and motion.
Exactly.
That's what they are. We talk about living from our values all the time. Values are not a head thing. They're qualities of mood and emotion, freedom, confidence, security. All those things are felt things, and that's energy and motion. A culture is not a static thing. It's something that's moving, that you feel when you walk into the office. We talk about, I felt the culture. That's energy. So it's not woo. And if a leader is not paying attention, they're not present.
Mm-hmm.
They're not in executive presence. A lot of, we go back to that term, a lot of executive presence is about build your charisma, grow your confidence, fake it till you make it, show up standing like this. It's gotten better with mindfulness, but it's still, there are hacks to be present. And presence is energy. It's opening a field around you, or the environment, as you said, around you, that allows for, you think about the wiring in a house. If there's a kink in the wiring in the house and the energy isn't flowing, you're not going to get electricity or work. You might have a fire, right? Because something's kinked in the things. I don't think leaders a lot of times reject that because they don't know what to do with that. Read their energy in the room. Because they themselves haven't read the energy, and they haven't read the energy in themselves. They're above the neck. And as the crisis and the pressure's going up, we force leaders to figure it out. Let's look at the term psychological safety. Again, we're using a lot of terms and asking leaders to adopt these terms, and with very little support. And all they do is let glaze over and say, okay, now this is the latest initiative. I got to figure out how to make more psychological safety happen, right?
That's right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think it's a checklist item. It's a to-do for them, and that's missing the entire point of what we're talking about. And when it relates to emotional intelligence, that executive leaders may give lip service to it, but don't necessarily embrace it. And in fact, to your point, they may be self-conscious to the extent that they double down on their competency and what their experience tells them. We need to go in this direction. We need to go in that direction. And they just say, here's what I want you to do. And once again, we're bowling over people. We're not engaging their hearts and minds to say, what do you think? Why do you think the way you think? I hired you for your good judgment and your expertise. I certainly want to hear it. And executives, when they get backed into the corner, they feel like they need to have the answer. And so they say, here's what we're going to do. Just go do it. And I expect a good result from it. And at that point, we have shut down that person in terms of what we think. We've not honored them by asking them what they think. We've just told them this is what you need to go do and do it at a high level. And that's short-term thinking, not long-term, in terms of the investment of the relationship, in terms of bringing out the best in that particular person, and also in terms of how do you respond to chaos and crisis. Remembering again that good leaders recognize that they're always on stage and they're modeling those kind of behaviors. And people especially are going to look at them related to how they respond in a high conflict, high crisis situation. That's when we look more to the leaders to say, how are we to operate in this regard? And so the leaders with sovereignty and executive presence recognize that. They understand that they're on stage and they know the criticality of what they say and what they do in that moment. And often it's what they do that people are going to emulate or at least respond to energetically. And if that's a golden opportunity for us to step back and say, okay, let me really evaluate consciously what I want this moment to bring out in my people and how we want to address this situation. At that point, it's not even about the problem. It's about the people. It's about how you approach the problem, not necessarily the solution to the problem.
Oh, it goes back to this term being instead of doing, right?
Yeah, it does.
Oh, and the leadership development profession in HR have been really trying to help in this way. They're really trying to bring things to people to operate from that place of being where all emotional intelligence rises, where presence rises, where confidence rises, where this natural way of operating rises. But it's gotten to a point where it feels unnatural because I'm learning all these things and now it's jargon. You're doing consultant speak. You're asking me to have emotional intelligence or whatever these terms that were floating around, they become, words lose their meaning. Why did they lose their meaning? Because people are where they're at. They're doing their best. Executives doing their best. They're super smart people. The best ones care. The best ones have some leadership chops, right? They have a natural operation of leadership at some level. And then it seems like more gets piled on. And what's the answer? How do we engage that level of being in ourselves? That is what is important to keep in mind. What is it how do we engage? What does it mean to operate from being versus doing? Not from a outer perspective, but from an inner perspective.
It's entirely about the inside out. And we see examples of that every day. And I'm a very visual person. So it's something that I recognize about myself, that I'm constantly observing what's going on. And sometimes I will take that external information and internalize it versus using my internal wellspring to inform the external and what I would like to exhibit. So it's easier said than done. And it's one of those paradoxical things that you and I talk about on the sidelines, that we're constantly experiencing that. How do we make sure that we are living from inside out when so much of our world is externalized and we observe and we react and we respond to it? Well, when you're in sovereignty, you're less reactive and you start to exhibit what is internal to you. What are the things that you hope and dream and long for? And how can you bring that to the situation? And that's ultimately the difference between being and doing, is we stand on that platform of sovereignty that you talked about and say, I'm not going to be wavered by the external influences. Yes, they exist. Yes, they have an impact, but I am going to be consistent with my longing, my dreams, my vision, my values, my principles, and how I respond to those external things. And if you don't have that foundation, then you're constantly being waved into the wind. And we used the example of the waves in the ocean before. When you have that sovereignty, you're operating from the depths of the ocean where the winds don't necessarily affect you like the surface does, where the waves are constantly built by the surface winds.
I'll speak directly. How do we address challenges when we're in this natural place that's within us? It's already there of sovereignty. And I was sharing with you before the show that we're in one of those cash crunch times as an entrepreneur. In 27 years, I've hit some pretty strong headwinds with that from time to time. And there's different ways that I've dealt with that. There is freaking out and getting on the phone to my family or whatever. And it's different this time. There's a knowingness in me that I'm going to get through it. Usually what I find is these times are usually times before a great breakthrough.
That's right.
That's been my experience.
Yeah.
And I'll have these thin times and then a burst and a deepening of my practice. because there's something being called from me at this time. And now there's a utility in the challenge. What do I really care about? What do I stand for? What do I know about what we're bringing to the world? I know we're bringing something to the world that's important. It's beyond making money. Yes, we want to make money, but it's beyond that. And I have to trust that. And we're deepening and broadening the message. So there's a ripple effect in the market to catch up with that. But there's a, first of all, knowing it's going to be okay. Worrying is not overcoming me. There's also this kind of joyous, kind of kid-like, okay, how do we get creative here? And new ideas have come to me from sitting with that creative joy of saying, okay, wow, I didn't even see that channel of possibility, and now that's opened up to me. So we're developing an online course, and we're engaging clients differently. We're more directly going after the market in a certain way around burnout. These are all things that have come from times of pressure. But when you're outside of your sovereignty, as you say, lose your footing, you lose your mooring. And that mooring does not come from the outside, it comes from the inside. The leaders that have gone through the resilient leader method have that place in them that they can call on. And it doesn't go away.
Just going to say, what you described are exact same experiences I've had as a solopreneur. There's tight cash flow times, and the fact that you've recognized that those are times where there's typically a breakthrough on the other end of that. And what is the underlying aspect of that is this notion of either things are happening for me or things are happening to me. And that's a perspective that you hold. And depending on your level of consciousness, if you're thinking that these things are just happening to me, then you're highly reactive and you operate from a fear-based notion of, oh no, I need to react in a certain way to achieve a certain outcome. Whereas if you experience it from a standpoint of these things are happening for me, you recognize what is the golden opportunity that exists within this. And that's when you get creative. That's when you get back to that childlike wonder. And that ultimately yields the kind of creative solutions that you're looking for and create something new and different that not only inspires you, but ultimately reaches your audience in a new way that creates value for you and them. And I delight in that notion. And it is just very simple to recognize something that we can all tangibly see, feel, taste, and touch is this idea of, are things happening to me or are things happening for me? And if you stand back and really look at it, we understand that all things happen for me. And if we adopt that notion that everything is happening for me, then we see the opportunity and we transcend the fear.
And in your sovereignty as a leader, you're also getting really connected to what you care about. Like if your family was in danger, I don't think there would be an issue with sovereignty returning to Ryan, right? If we are in a situation where somebody we love is hurting, or we're in a situation where we deeply care as a leader about how we operate around here. If I deeply connected to that sense of what might be perceived as my values for how we do things around here, and they don't separate from the actions or the results we need to produce. They become fused together. Like the whole idea of operating from purpose, that's been confiscated too. Like to the point where you can go online and in 5 minutes have your purpose statement by filling out a survey. It does all the work for you. And no, it takes the power away from understanding what your purpose is, which requires you to dig deep and understand what you care about, what has been consistent in your life, what you really wanted to be as a kid, what you really care about at the end of the day when you come into work every day. And digging to find the gold that's there. And once you connect with it, which is already there, the process of discovering your purpose opens something up for you, goes back to your saying on energy. It opens up an energy channel for actions and presence and engagement with others. When you're in these kind of challenging situations, when you're in crisis, are you attending the fire drill that's going around you? Are you trying to move the chairs around on the Titanic? Or are you coming back to let's say you're on the Titanic. I may be in the last moments of my life. Let me remember what I care about and how can I protect my family over myself? That becomes your focus. You give up your own life in moments like that for the sake of those people you love. because you get back to what you care about. Now, that's pretty dire, but it's the same thing happens whenever your boss is confronting you with something or the board's pressing on you on something and something feels off. Are you going to discern what's off for you before you respond? Or are you going to react and run like a fireman into your team and say, okay, we got to do this. We got to make sure this happens. And are we giving space for people to do that? Well, you have to claim that yourself first. And once you claim it, how does that impact others around you?
100%. That's exactly the modeling that we talk about from a standpoint of leadership and sovereignty in leadership. Is, once again, it goes back to what I said before, especially in a crisis situation, people are looking to you as a leader as to how to act and how to respond. So if you're calm, cool, and collected and say, hey, this is all right. This looks like a big challenge, but we've encountered big challenges before, and we always overcome those challenges. And I know that you folks are the experts, and you guys will come up with some great ideas as to how we deal with this. Now, if I hear that from a leader, I'm now immediately going, all right, let's go. Let's think about some great ideas about how to address this versus, no, this wave is coming. Yeah, I'm not sure what we're going to do, guys. We got to do something about this. And now the anxiety starts to increase. As we know, that triggers the fight or flight system. So now our central nervous system is kicked into gear. We're anxious. Our prefrontal cortex is not receiving all the blood that it needs to creatively problem solve in that situation. We are just in the midst of fight, flight, or freeze. And that's an emotional place and a physical place that I don't like to operate from. And not many people do if they can consciously prevent it. So it depicts for us how important that modeling of sovereignty is as a leader and how that carries forward the organization.
Absolutely. If you are freaking out even at some level, goes back to you energetically. People feel that. They feel it energetically. So I don't think that's a weird word. Emotionally, they feel it emotionally, however you want to say it.
I would agree.
If you're operating from sovereignty, you are kind of an anchor. And what you do is you engage other people's anchors. Yeah. So just a little bit of a recap where we've been so far, and then I want to jump in a couple other subjects and we'll wrap up for today. But what we've spoken about is that when you come from this natural grounded place of sovereignty, when it kind of activates in you, and it really is an inside out, as you said, activation that occurs. It's not something you have to think about. It just becomes present. And when you're in your sovereignty, gravitas becomes a natural outcome of that. It's a result of inner stability. You're not trying to fake it till you make it. It's just there. Confidence, it doesn't have rigidity to it. Like I'm being confident, I'm showing you I'm confident. It emerges naturally. And that there's an energy, as we pointed to, that comes that's connected to what we care about most. So that's the ground. I'm coming from what I care about most energetically, and that's creating a clear way that I'm engaging either in a conversation or in a meeting that's both opening the door for others to share. And at the same time, I'm going to call BS when I see it. I'm not afraid to call BS. And that's not being disrespectful. That's just saving time, right? And you're doing that. And teams respond to that if they know it's genuine. And we talk about being vulnerable and authentic all the time. Well, your vulnerability is as much calling the bullshit as it is saying, we're facing a challenge right now. This is where we have to go. I need your input. That's being vulnerable, right? Yeah. And authentic. And it's not like I'm trying to be like authentic and vulnerable. And fundamentally you stop performing and you relax into yourself.
And how many leaders have you encountered where they believed, whether consciously or unconsciously, that they need to have all the answers because they are the leader? And we recognize that as a part of what you do as a leader, you're not always working directly with the problem or the people that would elicit the kind of understanding that you need to be able to solve the problem. So therefore, you have to depend on your people that are closest to the issues. And that's not lost on me. Exactly. That sometimes leaders don't recognize that. And they, once again, going back to being vulnerable, they feel like they cannot be vulnerable. I have to have all the answers because I'm the leader. That's why they pay me the big bucks to make those hard decisions. But in fact, if you were vulnerable enough to say, hey, listen, this isn't my expertise. I know you guys deal with this situation on a daily basis. I need to hear your thoughts and your ideas. It takes nothing away from the leader to do that. In fact, what it does is
Well,
it
yeah, of
creates
course it doesn't.
an engagement.
If they're feeling the pressure from the outside to be the guy that or the lady that makes the decision, and now they have to operate in the place of I know, that takes you off your out of your center. Versus as a leader, my job is to make sure this gets solved. That's fair. The question is, how are you going to solve it? And it takes humility. This is where it's an interesting mix between sovereignty and humility. Sovereignty has humility baked in. And we talked about this before. There's this thing, it's I don't have all the answers. Although I have to make the decision. In order for me to make a decision, I need data, right? And as you say, they're closest to the fire than you are. Depending on the organization, especially at the C-suite level, you are in a stratosphere above all people that it's hard to understand from their perspective, not because you're holier than thou, but because you are in a different stratosphere dealing with things that they're not dealing with day to day. Yeah. So you have to come down to earth a little bit to be able to go back up and make a good decision. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about here. And the ability to be authentic and vulnerable serves you. It's practical, as you're saying. It's not something like we're told to be authentic and vulnerable. This is where we lose ourselves. Why did it tell me to be authentic and vulnerable? When it is a really practical thing, when you're connected to what you care about, which is solving the problem and solving it well for the sake of stakeholders and customers and making sure profitability is meeting the day, right? Those are real pressures that you're dealing with. And you also have to enroll people and give people perspective on what you're dealing with sometimes. That's vulnerability. Now, how much you deal with depends on what you can reveal. Like, we're not going to ask the President of the United States to reveal all the intelligence secrets they have because that wouldn't serve us and it wouldn't serve him or her. But they can say we're facing X, Y, and Z and we've got to deal with this. They deliver transparently the real deal, the real issues that they're facing. And in order to do that, you can't fake that. You can't fake it. You have to come from a truer, deeper place that you have to claim first. That's the ground you stand on. So are you standing on ground or are you standing on an old mattress trying to get your balance, lumpy mattress in front of the room trying to keep your balance as you're talking. That's kind of when you're outside of yourself. And this speaks to something we were going to talk about psychological safety. And again, it's this thing. It's like the right thing. We need to create it. No brainer. People need to feel safe. But what are we asking them to feel safe from and in? Are we asking them to feel safe to be themselves, to share their concerns?
That's exactly
to
right.
Share what they care about? Yeah. Psychological safety starts with you being safe inside yourself in this grounded place. Yeah. You feel secure in who you are, what you care about, standing on that platform of confidence blended with humility. And when you do that, what does that do for others? So you were going to say something.
What it does is it helps people release their masks. And we've talked about that mask in prior episodes. I have to show up this way, and this is my mask because this is what I perceive people expect of me. Whether that's true to who I am or not, I feel like that's the psychological safety that I've created for myself by wearing this mask, where true psychological safety is that I can show up authentically without having that mask on. And that's something that the leader can exhibit for their followers by saying, hey, accept me warts and all because I'm not perfect. Neither are you. We will make mistakes. We will have missteps, but how we learn and grow from them is what's important. And in fact, I hope we do because that tells us we're continuously learning and growing. And we can all do that together and support each other on that particular journey. Well, shoot, if a leader capped off and said those kind of things in a meeting, my energy would go through the roof and I would feel very empowered in that moment because I now know where that leader stands. I don't feel like I have to protect myself because the leader just gave me permission to be me. And that's ultimately what we want. And so much of our executive environments, corporate environments are permission based. And what do I mean by that is the leader sets the tune from the culture. And the culture is basically what the leader does and what the leader accepts is ultimately what we do. And if we've given people permission to show up authentically by sharing those kind of things and being vulnerable, then we have depicted the culture that has that psychological safety within it. You're not going to be judged. You're not going to be derided because you show up authentically. It may be an adjustment for us in terms of how we respond to that authenticity when it does show up. And we need to understand that we're always doing these things with respect and courtesy and value and principles. That doesn't mean we get to show up and be nasty. No, because that's who I am. No, 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 no. We're not going to tolerate those kind of behaviors. We're going to be as constructive as possible. But so much of this is permission based.
When a leader is showing up in that natural place of sovereignty, where they're deeply connected to what they care about, the team knows what they care about. We do have the rules of operation that allow us to stay in that respect with each other and expectations, but also the biggest permission is to be yourself. You're here to be yourself. Bring this forward. This is what you're here for. We'll bring to you what we need to make sure you make this a meaningful and fulfilling experience. At the end of the day, we have a job to do, but let's do it in a way where we can all be ourselves, be energized, stay connected to what we care about. Which is one of the reasons why so many people are unmoored today, is they're so distracted by what's going on, which is easy to be done. I'm not saying this is just a snap of finger. You can turn a blind eye to what's going on in the world. We talked about, life's not happening to you, but for you. How are these times bringing you back to yourself, to be yourself, to deeply connect to what you care about, to say, what do I want to create that's of value in the world for an executive when I show up every day? And so as we wrap up the conversation, leaders operate from that place. And we've touched on it in various different ways in the conversation already. What does that bring to their teams? If they're truly operating from this grounded place of sovereignty mixed with humility, the ability to be authentic, to be vulnerable for the sake of moving forward what we care about, which is the context for everything. And they show up consistently as that. What does that do for a team?
What we, in essence, have done by creating that environment is unbridled the energy and creativity that each of us have within us. And that takes on a synergistic effect when we interact with others that are aligned to addressing the same challenges and having the same mission, vision, and purpose as well. So we're multiplying. We're taking that multiplicity factor. If David, you and I are discussing how do we go in a certain direction and get there, and we start bouncing ideas off of one another, and I'm getting what you're saying and you're getting what I'm saying, and we start to formulate all this wonderful notion of how we want to move forward, there's a great deal of positive energy related to that. And the way I hold space for you enables you to continue to go on and go deeper and deeper and deeper and tap into a wellspring of creative ideas. And the same is held for me. And I'm starting to tap into these ideas. The effect of that is something that it's hard to put a monetary value on it because it is so exponential. And that's where I go back to the 10x results. That's literally what you experience is 10x results. And that goes back to that transactional versus transformational. And it's the task versus the way we perform the task. And that's why that modeling and that sovereignty and that authenticity is so valuable and such a crux of what we're talking about, that we are very much still very much a material-based society. And we focus on the task. We focus on just get it done, so to speak. And we focus on the short-term results. And we've seen what that produces in our culture, in our communities, our teams, our organizations, our society at large. And we know that there's a different way that is going to ultimately get us to where we want to go. And that's focusing on the way that we do those things, not the what, the how, that's going to be so relevant and important in terms of how we achieve.
It's right on point. The whole society needs to come home. We talk about homecoming. I'm coming home to operating from a place of values and operating from this place of sovereignty and humility and connection, all the things we've spoken about today. And when a leader operates from this place, politics start being put in their place. There's less politicking. There's more genuine conversations. The team becomes more self-regulating because the leader is self-regulated. Innovation becomes more important than the fear of taking an action that might upset people. I have more permission to step out of the box within a scope and reason before I might check in with my boss before I do something. But the engagement and trust and clarity becomes part of the deal. The culture becomes self-regulating. Yeah. That's how culture is grown. Yes, we can talk about all the right things to develop a culture. We can set our values. We can request people to create psychological safety and all the things we want to have our culture be a part of. But when we're operating from this natural place, it's the fuel that makes all that happen. It's the fuel that makes all that happen. So appreciate that. Well, as we wrap up this series, if you have any final words on what I just said or any final words on sovereignty, anything you want to say in the show today?
I would just invite our audience to go back and look through round 1, round 2, and now round 3 related to our conversations on sovereignty, because the theme has really hit home. And within each one of these episodes are gold nuggets that you can mine for yourself as a leader. And let's also talk about what a leader is. And I think it's important for people to recognize that you don't necessarily have to have a title to be depicted as a leader. You don't need to necessarily have supervisor or manager as a part of your official script on your business card. If you are an opinion leader, if people trust and respect what you have to say, then you are in and of yourself a leader. And that's something for you to recognize. For those that are aspiring leaders, for those people that ultimately want to be in that leadership role, or those people that currently occupy those executive leadership roles from a title standpoint as well, that there is some gold nuggets in all of these episodes, not least of which are the last 3 episodes on sovereignty and how important that is. It is the way, it is the how, it is not always the what. And if we only operate transactionally, we are missing out on those gold nuggets. We're missing out on that discretionary energy, the magic of engagement that is so important, and bringing out the best of our team. And as a leader, that's something that you can really tap into and take away from these episodes.
I'm glad you brought it back to leadership, because that's the foundation for this podcast on Phase Under Fire overall. Leaders are ultimately creators. That's what the job of a leader is. They create what's necessary now and for the future. And they do so fundamentally best when they're coming from a solid place of executive presence, which at the ground is really about sovereignty, stepping from my own true self, my core self that is already there waiting to be mined, and stepping into what I care about as a fundamental driver for how I operate with others. And then creating an environment in which that creativity can flourish in all those around me, AKA create other leaders. And you're right, leadership at this core self starts with leading ourselves and knowing ourselves. And when we start doing that, we start seeding the ground for others to do the same. And that's what all great leaders do. So appreciate the conversation. And just to close out to the audience, we've said it before, but it's worth saying it again. Sovereignty is not a technique. As we've talked about today, it's the ground from which leadership stands or falls. And this groundedness is already in you, ready to be fully activated. Now, if your nervous system is tired of leading from the edge, being performative, if you're done chasing fulfillment through hacks and habits, and if there's more available to you than you've been told, maybe this series did stir something in you for a good reason. And I want to remind you about the Resilient Leader Method. This is a radical return. And pair that with integration and support. You don't just remember who you are, you learn how to lead from that place in real time, no matter what comes. So if you're ready to learn more, reach out, because the truth is, once you return to that center, as Ryan will attest, everything changes. The world right now needs leaders who are awake, grounded, and leading from their core. So if that call has stirred something in you, we're here, ready when you are. Until next time, be present, be bold, be well. This is David Craigott signing off. Have a great rest of your day.